today to talk about an issue that's extremely important to us. Today we have with me Karen Irwin, the President and Chief Operating Officer at Universal Studios Hollywood, Curt Stocks, President of Legoland California Resort, Rafi Kaprelian, Regional Vice President for Cedar Fair, operators of Knott's Berry Farm, California's Great America, and Gilroy Gardens. Ken Partrop with Disneyland Resort, he's the president. So thank you all for joining us. This is our first venture into a streamed Zoom press conference. So we'll do our best with the technology. We really appreciate you joining us. Yesterday, as everybody is aware, the Newsom administration released guidance that will have the effect of keeping theme parks closed indefinitely. Our goal today is to share with you perspectives on how this decision will impact California's major theme parks, which is a signature industry in our state, and it will impact many thousands of people, business, and local communities. At the end of the press conference, we'll open up to questions using the Q&A feature. If you would like to ask a question, please make sure to identify yourself, your media outlet, and to whom you'd like to direct your question. So let's get started. I would love to kick it off to Karen Irwin at Universal Studios Hollywood. Thank you for joining us, Karen, and take it away.
Good morning, Erin, and thank you. At the heart of it, we don't see the guidelines as based in science or facts. We've proven that we can open and operate our parks safely and responsibly, and we've designed detailed health and safety protocols that are successfully in practice now at our theme parks in Orlando, Osaka, and Singapore. I also think it's a little bit disingenuous for the state to say they've collaborated with parks on these guidelines, despite being told that we would see reports and feedback following state visits to several of our sites in the last couple of weeks. And we expected those to be used for the basis of discussion and formulation of rational return to work protocols. That didn't happen. Those reports were never issued. And the guidelines that were released yesterday seem to have ignored, frankly, much of the input. The requirement that we sell reserved tickets and contact each guest 24 hours in advance of their visit is really onerous, and for many parks, it could be even impossible. The restriction of 25% capacity for indoor restaurants at our parks is an example of kind of an arbitrary guideline that contradicts guidance for all other California restaurants that can be seated up to 50% in Tier 4, including those just outside of our gate in City Walk. An insistence that opening our parks will draw guests from outside California ignores the fact that parks have already operated elsewhere, are already operating elsewhere, and see predominantly local attendance. We all know, and a lot of data supports this, that the international visitation to California is unfortunately not going to return to 2019 levels for many years to come. We're also seeing that the outer US attendance is vastly reduced. And on top of that, Southern California parks generally rely heavily on local visitors, even pre-COVID. But the biggest challenge that we have is these guidances placed us in Tier 4 behind other businesses that have already reopened. This makes no sense. It ignores reason and economic devastation this will bring to thousands of our employees, the indirect businesses that rely on us, and our industry overall. The health and safety of our guests and team members has always been a top priority for all of our parks. Our parks are controlled. They're primarily outdoor businesses that have proven that we can operate responsibly. Parks should be in Tier 3, along with other industries that have proven they can also open responsibly. So I'm going to turn it over to Curt Stocks, President of Legoland.
Thank you, Karen. From our perspective, we've seen all other seven other Legoland parks around the world reopen safely with millions of guests and around 20,000 employees all coming back to work without any COVID-19 incidents whatsoever. The guidance from the governor is grossly inconsistent with the guidelines given to other industries and lacks any scientific basis that can be supported by the CDPH. Legoland California Resort has developed a comprehensive and robust reopening plan, taking every precaution to meet and exceed guidelines given to other businesses and industries. And we've done this since voluntarily closing our gates almost 7 months ago now. As a father of 3 young children, these precautions from my perspective take on a very personal meaning, and I would feel completely safe bringing my children back to the park with all the new precautions we have in place in such a controlled environment. If you take a look at similar entertainment venues such as zoos, museums, aquariums, and family entertainment centers, all have been able to open outdoors and many indoors since Tier 1 without any distinction between the size of the facility. I should be clear that we're very pleased that these facilities have been able to open, and I would have to say that I think they've done a great job in their reopening protocols and how they've delivered their experiences to their guests. We just want the administration to treat us the same as industries of a very similar nature. Now, if you take a look at very different entertainment venues that the administration is allowing to reopen ahead of amusement parks that are easily higher risk and encourage transmission more than theme parks. Beaches, there's no enforcement of physical distancing or face coverings, and they regularly draw hundreds of thousands of guests across a weekend from all over. Card rooms and racetracks have been allowed to open outdoors in Tier 1, and indoors will be allowed to open in Tier 3. Larger shopping centres have been open indoors in Tier 1, and by the time they get to Tier 3, they'll be open indoors with absolutely no capacity restrictions whatsoever. So even yesterday's announcement that fans can return to stadiums before going to major theme parks show the inequities in the administration's reopening plans. Theme parks create a 100% controlled environment with temperature checks for all guests, mask enforcement, increased sanitization protocols, social distancing, measures that far exceed most daily life experiences and any other leisure activities. So we are very much ready to open, and we would implore the administration to allow us to do so. Next up, I'm pleased to introduce Rafi Kaprelian, Regional Vice President of Cedar Fair, operators of Knott's Berry Farm, California's Great America, and also Gilroy Gardens. Rafi.
Thank you, Curt. Our company has safely operated 7 of the 13 parks across the United States this year with 0 cases of COVID being traced back to our properties. Our theme parks are controlled, primarily outdoor businesses that we have proven we can operate responsibly. Our safety protocols have been proven effective, exceeding state requirements where we have opened. The question I would ask is that why are employees of larger parks any less entitled to work than those at other facilities? Our employees are eager to come back to work. We have offered countless times to show the administration the lengths to which we are willing to go to promote a healthy and safe environment for our guests and our employees. The administration's visit 3 facilities in California this past week just seemed to be just a show. They made no changes to the guidance for the large parks from what we saw 2 weeks ago. We hoped that the visit would be a real beginning of a dialogue between the parks and the administration, with shared goals of reopening our parks, but instead they proceeded with this plan that will keep our parks closed indefinitely. Now I'm going to turn this over to Ken Partrop, President of Disneyland Resorts.
Thanks, Rafi. So, you hear a little bit of a common theme here, that theme being that we all believe that we've proven that we can responsibly reopen. I think that's really, really important based on the lack of any data that says differently. And yet the state continues to have this fear that's associated with what happens if we open and how does this now become a major event. I think we've proven and continue to prove all over the world and in this country that we have very reliable and very robust protocols that really do protect the safety of our cast and employees and our guests. I think one of the things that I wanted to take a moment to talk about is I believe how this is being addressed from a state administration level. And we've had these conversations with the state before. I think it speaks to what I call a one-dimensional health approach versus a multidimensional health approach. The one-dimensional health approach is very much focused on the factors that the state's health agency is focused on. It is number of cases per 100,000 and positivity rate. And I think those are all fine measures, and we're not in disagreement with those. However, that is not the only health metric that needs to be taken into account here. When you begin to think about the overall health of a community, much of it is driven by employment, much of it is driven by income, much of it is driven, that income then drives the ability to feed your family or your ability to house your family or the ability to get medical care. It then has even further implications because it then begins to have an impact on people's health. Anxiety And joblessness is a gigantic toll, human toll on individuals. It begins to affect things as dire as suicide rates and life expectancies and things of that nature. So it is much broader. This pandemic is a much broader health crisis when unemployment becomes a factor within what we're trying to do. We continue to talk to the state about this. Nevertheless, they continue to not weigh this as strongly as we believe it should be weighed. One of the things that we've recently achieved is our unions, which typically are very boisterous, have also come back and said, we are ready, we are comfortable with the safety protocols that allow for a safe reopening. And they have now communicated that to the administration as well. Again, I'm concerned that it's not having a general impact. We really do appreciate the administration's desire to keep transmissions down. By the way, we're not at cross purposes. We believe in that. We're just not aligned on what I call a collaborative and balanced approach that is driven by science and data. And so I think that becomes a real opportunity for us as we begin to move forward. As we begin to think about this, we really do need to be judicious with how we're making decisions and really understand the breadth of the impacts that are happening to so many different people. So in summary, we're strongly advocating for a science and real-time data-based approach to achieve what I think is a holistic and balanced solution. Ultimately, we all want to get people back to work. That getting them back to work helps from a health perspective. And again, I think that's the right kind of collaborative solution that we should all be working with the state on to achieve. Thank you. I'm going to pass it back to Erin.
Great, thank you. Thank you to all of our park presidents for joining us today. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Q&A. If you'd like to submit your questions, I'd remind you to please identify yourself in the question and your news outlet. And if it's a question directed to one of our park presidents, please let me know. And the first question I've got it from a couple different reporters. There are questions about whether CAPA or parks will be considering any legal action to gain permission for parks to reopen in the state or to change the state's reopening guidelines for the parks. I'll take that one. I think that all options are open at this point. We're going to continue to explore our options. Our number one goal is to be allowed to reopen responsibly. Obviously, we'd love to keep that conversation going and come up with a reasonable timeline for reopenings, but at this point, any options are viable. I'm going to pause there. We don't really have many other questions.
Erin, I'll build on while you're waiting for questions to come in.
Okay.
You know, the concept of trying to come up with a collaborative solution, I think, is the end goal for all of us. One that's fair and balanced and takes into account all the facts that we're referring to. So, you know, I think that's the ultimate opportunity, and one that, you know, we all gladly and willingly would roll up our sleeves and work with the administration to do so. But it has to be a much greater back and forth dialogue, not just a you told us what to do. We're now trying to do that with all intent, and then the goal line keeps moving. And so again, we want to be able to have this dialogue, reasonable dialogue, so that we can move forward to this collaborative solution.
Great, thank you, Ken. I have a question here from Brady McDonald with the OC Register. It looks like we've got questions for each of the park presidents, so get ready. For Ken and Karen, what are the next steps for Disneyland and Universal? Is a partial reopening a possibility? And then he also asked about the legal action, but I took care of that one. So I'll pass it to you, Karen, first. What are the next steps for Universal?
Sure, thanks, Erin. Obviously, our primary concern above and beyond everything else is how to bring our team members back to work. We have so many employees that are not getting paid right now. And so that's certainly top of mind in everything that we do. We have explored doing a reopening with some of the already permitted businesses on our site, whether that's food and beverage or retail. So we are exploring those possibilities. Unfortunately, that's only going to allow us to bring a fraction of our team back, but I would certainly do it. So it is something that we are looking into. That should not, though, in any way mitigate for the problem of not having our entire park reopened. And that is our main goal, is to bring all of our team members back to work and reopen in our entirety. And we really do believe that that should be in tier 3.
I think Karen said that incredibly well. You know, and I think I would share with you what I'm sure all of the leaders of this industry are experiencing, which are the tragic stories of people, you know, not just our cast members and employees, but all the related businesses that are affected by this, the small businesses that were generational businesses that have not been able to reopen and are terrified that their businesses that were created by their grandparents, you know, are no longer going to be viable going forward. You know, the hoteliers and the vendors and all of those different people, it begins to total in the hundreds of thousands of people that are so incredibly negatively impacted. And again, what I worry about is, you know, what will happen some number of months from now when many of those businesses have folded, and what does that then do to the communities that we operate in? I think it's also pertinent to bring up the fact that the tax base that all of these attractions bring to our communities is incredibly important in funding essential services for the populace. And what happens when that begins to dry up? Are essential services then being cut? That's a real concern as well. I think, you know, we'll get at, you know, what our opportunities are commercially as best we can. But again, to Karen's comment, it's microscopic compared to, you know, opening our parks up, you know, at least with a ramp up plan, and then more fully as time goes on.
Great, thank you, Ken. For Rafi, the question from Brady is regarding Santa Clara County, where officials have said that they don't want to let Gilroy Gardens or Great America reopen under the state guidelines. Do you have a reaction for that?
Thanks for the question, Brady. Yes, at this point, we're discussing it with them. We were waiting for another answer to come back from them. So I will leave it at that at this point. But we were very disappointed in the fact that they're taking a harder stance without any scientific data, as Ken has mentioned before. So we were somewhat bewildered at their action.
Thank you, Rafi. I'm actually going to move on to other questions. We've got a lot of them coming in through Q&A as well as through Facebook and text messages. So I don't think we're going to get to all of them, but we'll do our best. We had a question here about the state officials' visit to Florida. And I'd like to open that up to Karen and Ken to see if you have any insight on the state officials' visits to your parks in Florida.
Karen, you want to go first?
Sure. You know, I thought the visits were very productive. The representatives from the state, including health department officials, were very engaged. We took them through very in-depth site tours, looking at every piece and part of our business to demonstrate that we've, you know, thought of how to bring people back safely into our environment, including our team members. We have rewritten thousands of pages of SOPs. We have the training ready. We are really ready to go. And I think it was, you know, based on their questions and some of their feedback, I thought it was in many ways enlightening to them. It was incredibly disappointing, though, that post those visits, we were told we would get feedback and reports within a week or so, and those did never materialize. So we didn't see them. What we were hoping was that those would be the basis for further discussion and collaboration on how to put together practical and rational guidelines for bringing our businesses back to reopening our businesses. And so it was really disappointing that didn't seem to come to fruition.
These reviews, for those of you that aren't familiar, had health officials, safety officials, and even economic development officials visiting parks in Florida and in California. And each of these visits to each of these parks was multi-hours of detailed review. And in fact, really looking at not just what we were presenting, but looking at the guests that were in all of our facilities to see how they were behaving and how our cast members and employees were reinforcing the protocols. So if you saw somebody with a mask that was down, below their nose, did they see employees going up to them and telling them the proper function of how to use a mask? Those are the kinds of things that they came away with seeing really strong and stringent enforcement of our protocols. I think that's one of the amazing differentiators of our industry, which is we do this for a living. We are expert operators and very, very strong in enforcing the behaviors that we need our guests to adhere to. And so we, again, like Karen, came away from the experience going, okay, this is great. They have a much greater and deeper understanding of what we have. They had a couple of suggestions, which is fantastic. We could continue to build our protocols and have great dialogue around that. But a number of days later, it was no, and now we're announcing and moving forward with this tier 4 orientation, not taking into account, at least from our perspective, any of the things that they saw other than, what they're most concerned about.
Great, thank you, Ken and Karen. The next question I'm going to direct to Curt at Legoland. Matt Hoffman with KPBS San Diego asks, Dr. Galley yesterday said theme parks are a high-risk setting, especially with tourists coming. Do you agree?
Yeah. Okay. So I think I think the inconsistencies in the issuance of guidance so far that I pointed out earlier probably talk to that. So Dr. Galley did give his rationale for theme parks being high risk through increased touch points, through the fact that of the perception that we draw guests from outside of the community, and we create longer stays through hotels and restaurants and so on. But as I pointed out through the inconsistencies, it's very similar to what we may expect to see from a zoo, from an aquarium, and also from a beach. The benefit we have, and I'll talk to a little bit what Ken just mentioned, we have protocols put in place to be able to 100% control the experience for guests, right from capacity management through to increased sanitization protocols to screening of guests before they enter our property. We also have a highly educated and engaged workforce that understands how to execute these protocols. We're already an industry that is so focused on the health and safety of our guests and our staff that these protocols are merely an extension of that. So a culture already exists, and we are better positioned than most other industries to apply the protocols that we have set out.
Erin, can I just tag on to that for a second?
Certainly.
That has been a consistent concern that's been expressed by the state. And as I said earlier, we know for a fact that most of the attendance that we're going to see through the remainder of this year and well into next year is going to be local. We know that from a lot of research that we've done, as well as what's actually happening at parks that are open all over the world. And we've pointed this out several times to the state. But I do think that it's important to understand, and maybe the people on this call won't appreciate this so much, but parks in Southern California are not the main reason people visit Southern California. And a lot of what attracts tourists in outer US market to California is the weather, it's the beaches. It's a lot of things that people are frankly already doing because those businesses are already open. So to say that we would be the primary driver of that visitation, I think is erroneous. And really kind of unfair in terms of tagging that on us. I think we all wish that, the parks were the main draw of California, but if they're going to draw anywhere, they're going to draw in Orlando, and we do know what's actually happening there. And so we're not speculating, we know based on fact who's visiting those parks, and it's overwhelmingly local attendance. The other thing to keep in mind is, the locals here, without our parks open, they're going somewhere else. They're going to Las Vegas. They're leaving the market to go do other things and enjoy other recreational activities because some of it is not accessible here. And then they're returning to our state. So from a practical standpoint, I don't see how that is better than having them visit locally one of our parks, where, as several of us have already pointed out, are very controlled environments and predominantly outdoors.
Great, thank you. Next, we're going to go to Joseph Pimentel with Spectrum News. He asks about Dr. Galley had mentioned that they visited theme parks across the state. Did Dr. Galley and his staff visit any of your theme parks, and what were some of their concerns? Who'd like to take that?
I'll start. Dr. Galley's staff members visited Disneyland. Dr. Galley did not. We have repeatedly asked and invited him to come and see for himself. He has unfortunately been unable to do that, and that's disappointing. That being said, they were incredibly thorough. They, spent hours. They took detailed notes. They, even had a regroup with each of us after the meetings to talk about what they saw, what they observed, and even suggestions that they might have for levels of improvement. We're still waiting for some greater detail than, how do you keep people, with a stroller, 6 feet apart versus 5.5 feet apart when they're in a family group. I mean, we really want to get into the impactful protocols that can enhance this in ways that really can make a difference. We think we're, well on our way to that, and would gladly take suggestions from the state. But again, we're not getting those. We're not getting that solution-oriented discussion. It's much more of a here's what it is, and you just need to live with it.
Okay, anybody else want to take a stab at that? Otherwise, we'll move on. All right, I'm seeing a couple different questions from reporters about the economic fallout from the state's decision, citing Disney's laying off of 28,000 employees. But for all the parks, a more broad question about how this is going to affect those employees, and then additionally, the businesses around your parks and the employees of those businesses. So we haven't heard from Rafi. I'd like to give you a chance to chime in there, and then we can open it up to the other park presidents.
Sure. When you look at our parks, we're such a big economic engine to our communities. And even us in Buena Park, we're one of the largest employers and the largest business generator out there. And we are hearing from the local community, the local business owners, that how much it's hurting them. So I think these parks have a great impact on the greater economy of the cities that we reside in, even the counties. And more importantly, I think Kim was talking about this, the psychological effect that it has out there. We have opened Knott's Berry Farm with food tasting events, and every day we hear our guests, when they come in to partake in that, how thankful they are that we are open, and it gives them a relief from their plight that they're going through right now under COVID restrictions. So I think there's a bit broader impact on the communities than just the economic impact.
Okay, any other comments on that?
I've already said this, but I'll reiterate. It is the thing that is the most disturbing to me, that generally we have 8,000 employees in our park throughout the year, between 7,000 and 8,000. And today we have about 1,000 people that we're employing, and it's difficult. And, our employee base, our team members are just, they're amazing people, and they've been with us a long time. I think there's a little bit of a misconception that the people that work in our parks are seasonal, or they move jobs a lot. We have a lot of really long time full-time employees, some of them that have been here, many of them that have been here for more than 20 years. I'm thinking of specifically a gentleman, Rob, who's at our front gate. He's worked with our company for more than 45 years. These people have invested their lives and their livelihoods with the parks business, and they are incredible. And while I applaud and I love our attractions that we spend so much money on, I think they're amazing, what we really provide to people is an experience with our employees, and they're the ones that are suffering the most through this.
And our motivations are, very much focused on those employees, that workforce, those cast members that are suffering the most. And all of us are getting notes and phone calls and emails on a almost hourly basis on, please stand up for us. This doesn't feel right. We want to come back to work. Again, as I reiterated, our unions have now come out in advocating that they're ready to come back to work. They feel safe to come back to work, and they are initiating, their own campaigns to try to make that happen. This is all about the opportunity to reopen. And then when we reopen, all of us can begin bringing people back, and again, whether there are capacity constraints or what the capacity constraints are, our intent is to bring people back to work, to get jobs going again, to get our community economies going again. It's a very, very simple, yet incredibly, challenging at this moment in time objective.
Great. And Curt, Jonathan Horn from ABC 10 in San Diego had the same question for you about the impact on employees.
Sure. I think very, very similar to my colleagues here. We through summer trading, we would expect to have around 3,000 employees at work. At our lowest point, we were down well below 100 employees at work, which will give you a sense of the scale. We've been very fortunate, I guess, in that we've been able to reopen our hotels. We've been able to open our aquarium, which has allowed us to at least commence the process of bringing a very small amount of staff back. But the reality is we still have many hundred on furlough, and whilst we're happy to have been able to continue to pay benefits for those staff, the reality is we need to get those staff back as soon as possible. We are maybe also have a little bit of a unique element in that we are here in North County in San Diego, and we're part of a relatively small community in Carlsbad, and I think it shouldn't go without mentioning the impact on our area and on the community in which we're an enormous part of. We're the biggest employer here in Carlsbad, and the flow-on impact, particularly across summer trading to leisure hotel bookings, to restaurant trading, to general tourist trading in the area is absolutely catastrophic. And a further extension of closure is just not acceptable here in this area, and that needs to be taken into account.
Great, thank you, Curt. And I'm going to ask a final question. I see it popping up in a few different questions, and I believe we started to answer it earlier, but I'll ask each of the four. What are the next steps? What happens next for each of your parks?
Well, I'll start with, I'm very, very much hoping that this discussion is not over, that we're going to continue to work with the governor. Frankly, the most disturbing part of these guidelines is opening in Tier 4. And frankly, I just don't see a path forward to getting to that level. And I know that there was a comment made yesterday that San Francisco is in that level. There's so much of this that we don't understand in terms of how those levels are achieved, but getting to the levels that are set right now for Tier 4 just seem unachievable. I have to believe that a lot of that is based on how the testing is done, where the testing is done, how much testing is done to try to achieve those. And so for me, I think part of this process should be much more visibility to how that is, that's calculated, and what can we do to affect a difference in some of those measurements. I'm very concerned that LA County, being as populous as we are, can achieve that Tier 4 anytime in the near future, and probably well into next year. So that's the most disturbing part of this, I think. That said, we have no choice. we're hoping to continue conversation. We started dialogue with the county and with the state back when we closed, and we've had that ongoing conversation ever since. I hoped that would have resulted in a more collaborative issuance of guidelines, but it doesn't seem to be the case. But we have no choice. We're going to keep working with them and hoping that we can influence their thinking and frankly get some more data on how these tiers can be achieved and whether or not the tiers as set, the criteria for those tiers, is even rational.
We're working with Dr. Chow from Orange County Health on a regular basis. He's already come out and said that Disneyland should be able to open in the orange tier. That's his conclusion. That's the Orange County Health official that believes strongly that we can accomplish that particular scenario. He also is working with us to try to understand, are there benchmarks out into the marketplace that we could learn from and we could potentially adjust our protocols to? So the San Francisco County getting into the yellow tier, how did they do that? What were the factors that contributed to that? Is there a learning opportunity for us so that we can then begin to apply that to the counties that we're in? That's not being shared and hasn't been shared with us to this point in time. It's another part of what we continue to want to call the collaborative approach to all of us trying to solve for this together, as opposed to, we're all taking sides in entrenched positions. I would tell you the theme park industry is not in an entrenched position. We are flexible, we are open-minded, we are looking for data and science-based solutions, and we stand ready to do that at a moment's notice.
My colleagues have covered quite a bit and made a lot of great points, so I thank them for that. We'll continue to work. That's what we know how to do best. As an industry, the safety is in our DNA, and I think we have worked very, very diligently to this point to make it our facilities safe as possible till we reopen again. And we've seen the proof across the other entities that we do operate in. We are working with our city leaders. We are working with the Sacramento leadership and trying to get them to understand. I think the bottom line, what we're looking for is an equal treatment and no more assumptions around who we are and what we're going to draw or not draw from that stuff. We want to be safe. We have integrity around that, and to be told that we're not and we're not going to operate is offensive, in my opinion. So I think with open arms and an open discussion, we'll be willing to continue our dialogue. If not, all options are open for us.
Yeah, I think the intent is clear from the administration in order to keep us closed in the short term with the Tier 4 structure. So we'll continue to work with the administration to encourage them to try and articulate the basis and the facts sitting behind their decision and their guidance at the moment. And once we have that information, perhaps we then have the opportunity to discuss those challenges and work around them. I think we also then need to work on 25% capacity for the industry, because it is obviously immediately restrictive in the fact that we need to wait for Tier 4, but we also then need to work with the administration on how long the industry can sustain 25% capacity, because Tier 4 is already aspirational. We need to understand what the administration's view is on how long the state will remain in Tier 4.
Great, thank you to our park presidents. And we are coming up on our time limit, so I wanted to check in with our speakers to see if there are any closing comments that you'd like to make before we wrap things up.
One comment I do want to make is that I want to ask our communities to reach out to the governor's office and ask him about why are we being held back. I think we do benefit the communities in many ways. We talked about this psychological, we talked about the economic impact. I think with their help and letting them know that how we can benefit, I think will be beneficial to us as well.
I would add, the economics can't be ignored. And we talked about economic impact, and we talked about the restriction on capacity that has real implication, because frankly, this is not going to be a surprise to anyone on the call, any one of the presidents. Our opening with limited capacity in this situation is not to generate a ton of profit. It's not going to happen. So what we are focused on, what I'm focused on, is getting the business up and operating so we can bring people back to work. It is not going to be a hugely profitable venture for us. We want to get back on the track and eventually turn to a net profit, but that's not going to happen for a while. And so I think it's important for people to understand that we don't take this lightly. And this is not the first time we've seen collaboration from all of the parks. We collaborate consistently on safety protocols. It happens all the time. And so with COVID, we have worked together very closely to come up with protocols we thought were rational and fair and achievable for our industry. And we put those forward. Unfortunately, they don't really sync up to the guidelines that have been issued right now. And I will join my colleague and say, if you can reach out to your local officials, your state officials to help us get back to work, this is to bring people back to work.
Yeah, and my final comment is very much along those lines. We absolutely appreciate the support, and I'll speak more to thanking the local support that we've had here at Legoland California Resort. San Diego County, the city of Carlsbad have been a wonderful support for us. Every legislator that we've engaged with to share our plan have absolutely unequivocally endorsed what we're planning to do, and we absolutely appreciate that support. And I understand that exists across the industry. So we know, I guess, at grassroots level, we have the support to reopen, and I thank everyone for their support there. And we'll continue to work at it and be open as soon as we can.
We and all the related people to our industries are heartbroken for so many reasons, as discussed earlier. We are all united in trying to get back to work in a safe and responsible way. And again, I will continue to implore the administration to reconsider, to consider new factors, to potentially stop focusing on things that they're concerned about and talking with us directly about how those kinds of things can be addressed and curtailed, if they are even substantive. So we know that it's going to be a long run here. We're united and we'll persevere to ultimately get our industry back open, get our people back to work, and get our communities in a more balanced place, both economically and amid the pandemic. I thank you very much for your time, everyone. Erin?
Great. Thank you to our wonderful speakers today. We appreciate your time and sharing your perspectives with all of us. In conclusion, we strongly believe that responsibly reopening amusement parks on a reasonable timeline can and should be done at the same time as the state continues to fight this pandemic. We do not think the two are mutually exclusive. We will continue to urge Governor Newsom to revise the guidance and allow for us to open on this reasonable timeline in Tier 3 to get this signature theme park industry back up and running, put people back to work, help revitalize the communities surrounding them, and provide the much needed resources to local governments. So thank you again, and thank you for joining us. This concludes our virtual press conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.